Hi, this is Steps in a Journey, and this is a class on the spiritual life as we journey together to eternal life. And we're beginning to study Augustine in his book Confessions. We started this book before COVID started and the lockdown in March 2020, and we stopped reading it then. And when we got onto Zoom and connected, not everyone was on Zoom, but now quite a few people that have been reading Augustine with us are connected, and so we're just going to continue reading Augustine's where we left off in class way back in March 2020. And we are on Book VII at age 30, and that's where we're starting today. If you'd like to catch up, just take hold of the book and start reading until you catch up. What we do in this class is we read and we interpret what Augustine wrote, explain a little bit about it. And if we have people on Zoom, if they have any questions, they might come in and ask a question. Book 7, at age 30, Chapter 1. My evil and abominable youth was now dead, and I was passing into early manhood. As I increased in years, I grew more defiled in vanity, for I could not conceive of any substance but such as I saw with my own eyes. And he talks about this as a vain thing and evil thing to do. He says, I did not think of you, O God, under the form of a human body. From the time I began to hear anything of philosophy, I had always avoided this. And I rejoice to have found the same rejection in the faith of our faith of our spiritual mother, the Catholic Church. But I did not know how else to think of you. And lots of times we picture God as an old man. We think of him as a human with a human body. And yet that's not how God is. And this chapter begins with explaining how God is. And Augustine says, I did not know how else to think of you. As a man, and such as I was, I sought to conceive of you as the sovereign, only true God. And in my innermost soul, I believed you to be incorruptible, inviolable, and unchangeable. Because though I did not know whence or how, yet I saw most plainly and felt sure that what can be corrupted must be inferior to the incorruptible. What is corrupted is inferior to the uncorruptible. What could not be violated or injured, I preferred unhesitantly to what could receive an injury. And I deemed the unchangeable to be better than that which is changeable. My heart passionately cried out against all my mental constructs, and with one blow I sought to drive away from my mind's eye all that unclean troop which buzzed around it. I like the way he talks about mind's eye. How you see with your mind's eye. And if you just sit there right now and imagine being inside your mind. Imagine seeing what you see a little bit further back than what you are, but you're in your mind. And that's how you think of things. When you remember things, when you meditate upon things. Psalm 111 says, God keeps in our mind the things He has done. And that's what you do. You go back in your mind's eye to think, to remember the past. And he thought of all the troop which buzzed around it. I didn't look up the word troop, but I think it doesn't mean a nice word with flies buzzing all around it. Flies are drawn to terrible smells. But alas, in the twinkling of an eye, they gathered quickly about me. And these are these flies. And he talks about a twinkling of an eye. I want to point that out. And another translation, it's the flickering of an eyelid. And which phrase do you use? You know, I've used more often twinkling of an eye, but what does this exactly mean is very fast, as you flicker your eyelid, that's how fast it's happened. In the twinkling of an eye, they gathered again thickly about me, flew against my face, and clouded my vision, so that, though I did not think of you, God, under the form of a human body, yet I was forced to conceive of you as being something corporal, in space, either infused into the world or diffused infinitely outside of it. And when you think of diffused, we think of spraying a room deodorizer. It diffuses around the whole world, around the whole room. And that's how he was thinking of God. How is He? Was He infused into the world or diffused all over? A being that was incorruptible, inviolable, and unchangeable. Incorruptible, unable to be corrupted, inviolable, unable to be injured, and unchangeable. And that's what he really looked for in God, and he found, his mother taught him about God being unchangeable. And although he objected strenuously to his mother's teachings about the Catholic Church, that was still the thing that he sought for in God. Are these three things: incorruptible, inviolable, and unchangeable. And he knew whatever defined God had to have those qualities to God. So I preferred this to one that was corruptible, inviolable, and changeable. For whatever I conceived to be deprived of this space seemed to be nothing. Yes, altogether nothing. Not even a void. So if God did not exist in a space, he thought of it as a void, nothingness. And if a body were taken out of its place, and the place should remain empty of any body at all, of earth and water, air, and the heavens, yet it would remain an empty space, a spacious nothing, as it were. Being thus, so if we take a body out of a space, it leaves something, a space. But he said if you take God out of a space, there's nothing. It's a void, nothing at all. Not even a space of where he was. But he thought he had a hard time grasping this in his mind. Being thus totally materialistically minded, not clear even to myself, so that whatever was not extended over certain spaces, either diffused or massed together or puffed out, or whatever did not or could not receive some of these dimensions, I thought was altogether nothing. For my heart then ranged over such forms as I could see with my eyes. I did not yet understand that this very observation by which I formed these same images was invisible to the eye. And yet, my mind could not have formed them if it had not itself been some great thing. So how could he's talking about how could he form in his mind things that he could not see? And yet he did. How could that be? And in the same way I tried to conceive you, God, life of my life, as vast, extending through infinite spaces, penetrating on every side the whole mass of the universe, and extending beyond it in every direction through immeasurable, boundless space. Thus, the earth would have you, the heavens would have you, all things could have you, and they would have their limits within you. But you, as having no limits. For as the body of the air which is above the earth does not hinder the light of the sun from passing through it, penetrating it, not by bursting or by cutting, but by filling it wholly, so I imagined the body of the heavens, air, and sea, and of the earth too, as being pervious to you, so that all its parts, the greatest and the smallest, admitted your presence. And by an invisible inspiration, you governed everything that you have created, both inwardly and outwardly. This is what I conjectured because I was unable to think of anything else. For this was false. If this were true, then a greater part of the earth would in this case contain a greater part of you, and a smaller one less of you. And all things would be full of you in such a way that the body of an elephant would contain more of you than that of a sparrow, since it's larger and takes up more room. Thus, you would make parts of you present to the several parts of the world in fragments. Large pieces to the large, little pieces to the small. You are not like this. But you had not yet enlightened my darkness. I remember having a brilliant idea that God was, what was that, lava lamp. God was like a lava lamp, and that Jesus was like a splurt out from him. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. And it's almost like what Augustine is saying here. He thought it was a brilliant idea, but he knew it was wrong. Well, I didn't know it was wrong, and I started telling this to the priest. And he says, Kathy, that's heresy. Now Augustine is thinking that God feels everything. But how does he feel it? Does an elephant have more of God than a sparrow? And these are the things that he thought about, contemplated, and I'm sure many of us have too if we haven't taken a philosophy class or another type of class explaining how God in a spirit is. We just say God is spirit and let it go at that without any other explanation. But Augustine didn't take that as good enough. He wanted to know more. So let's see if we get an answer in chapter 2. It was sufficient for me, Lord, to oppose those deceivers, those dumb prattlers. Dumb, since your word did not sound forth from them. And to use the argument Nebridius used to propound while we were still at Carthage. So his opponents were really the Manichaeans. If you recall, Augustine joined the Manichaean religion, but then he was abandoning it. And he knew that it was wrong because, one, they believed in a changeable God was one of the things. And so he wanted to figure out ways to debate them. And one of the things that he said was the argument used by a friend of his, Nebridius, way back when he was living in Carthage. All of us who heard it, he says, were disturbed by it at the time. And that would be, they were wondering about it. Not disturbed, saying that they didn't think it was wrong, but rather they thought maybe it was so brilliant. And so Nebridius's argument went like this. What could that supposed kingdom of darkness, which the Manichaeans considered a mass, or counter substance to God, a mass opposed to God, have done to God? What if this mass opposed to God had done to God? What would have had done to God if God refused to fight it? And he's talking about the evil presence. If there's a mass opposed to God, which is an evil presence, and he's challenging God, what would happen if God refused to fight it? If they answered that it would have done God some hurt, or some harm, then God would be subject to injury and corruption. And he's already determined in his mind that God is incorruptible and unable to be injured. If they said that it could do God no harm, there's no reason why God should fight against it. So you have the evil, and it's challenging God. God fights it. If God is injured, but it can't be. God cannot be injured. But if God is not injured, why would he fight the evil? If God could never be harmed by evil. And so he's fighting this argument. He's describing this argument. And many people believe that there's a good God and a bad God. controlling this world. And that's what Augustine is talking about. But they held it was this very fighting that involved some part of you. Some members or offspring of your very substance were intermingled with opposing powers and natures not created by you, and were corrupted and deteriorated to such an extent by them as to be turned from happiness to misery, and to need assistance in order to be delivered and purified. This offspring of your substance, they taught, is the soul, which enslaved, defiled, and corrupted as it is, can be relieved by your word, free, pure, and whole. But Nebridius argued in that case, the word itself is then corruptible, because it was one of the in the same substance as the soul. And if they affirmed that your essential being, that is, your substance, is incorruptible, then all these sayings of theirs were false and deplorable. But if they said that you are corruptible, then that very statement showed itself to be false and to be abhorred. This argument of Nebridius was an adequate one then against those, the Manichaeans, who deserved to be vomited forth from the surfeited stomach, since it gave them no escape from this dilemma without horrible blasphemy of heart and tongue, of thinking and speaking such things of you. That God can be changed, that God can be injured, manipulated, and corrupted. This is blasphemy, he says, of your heart and tongue. And so we go into chapter 3. So now he's talking about evil, this mass opposed to God. In chapter 3, he talks about where does it come from? But although I held and was fully persuaded, O Lord, the true God, who made not only our souls, but our bodies, and not only our souls and bodies, but all beings and all things, that you were incorruptible, unchangeable, and in no part mutable. Yet I did not understand clearly and without difficulty the cause of evil. Whatever it was, I perceived that it must be understood so as not to force me to believe the unchanging God to be changeable, lest I should become the very evil I was seeking to understand. I tried to understand it then, free from anxiety, sure of the untruthfulness of the Manichaeans asserted, whom I shunned with my whole heart. For I saw that by seeking the origin of evil, they were filled with evil themselves, in that they preferred to think that your substance suffered evil than that their own committed it. So I directed my attention to discern what I now heard, that free will was the cause of our doing evil, and your righteous judgment is the cause of our suffering from it. But I could not clearly discern this. When I tried to draw the eye of my mind out of that deep pit, I was plunged into it again. And as often as I tried, I was thrown back again. But this raised me a little toward light, and that I now knew that I had a will, as well as that I had life. So he knew that he had a will just as much as he knew he had life. And when I was willing or was unwilling to do something, I was very certain that it was none but myself who was willing or unwilling. Immediately I perceived that the cause of my sin lay there. We've heard the expression, the devil made me do it. He's saying, no, your own will made you do it. People might say, God made me do it. I can't help myself. Or they might say, God knows why I'm doing this, blaming it on God. When they know they have their own willpower and they have a choice. And God is unchangeable. And what he's saying there is what God teaches. The Ten Commandments is not just for Jews and Christians to obey to get to heaven, but everybody. Because God isn't changeable saying, oh, only Jews and Christians have to do this and this and this to get to heaven. He's written the book of the Bible saying all the ways, what we have to follow to get to heaven. He wrote it for us to know how to get to heaven. And to say, well, I'll make up my own rules. No, God will agree to that. God is unchangeable. And that is part of what it means for God to be unchangeable. But what I did, Augustine continues, but what I did against my will, I saw that I suffered rather than did, and that I judged not to be at fault, but my punishment. However, since I believed you to be the most just, I quickly confessed that I was being justly punished. But again I asked, who made me? Did not my God, who is not only good, but goodness itself? How did I come then to will to do evil and to be unwilling to do good, so that I am justly punished in this way? Who put this in me and implanted in me this root of bitterness, since I was completely made by my most sweet God? If the devil were the author, where did the devil himself come from? And if he was a good angel who became a devil by his own perverse will, where again did that evil will in him come from? Seeing the whole nature of angels was made altogether good by that most good Creator. By these thoughts I was again sunk down and stifled. Yet I was not plunged into that hell of air where no man confesses you, to think that you suffer evil, rather than men do it. So yet I was not plunged into that hell of air to think that God suffers evil rather than man does it. Chapter 4. I was struggling to discover answers to other difficulties, having already found out that the incorruptible must be better than the corruptible. Whatever you were, I acknowledged you to be incorruptible. That's the definition of God. For no one ever was, nor ever shall be able to conceive of anything better than you, who are the highest and best good. But since the incorruptible is most surely and certainly to be preferred to the corruptible, as I now preferred it, then if you were not incorruptible, it would have been possible for me to conceive of something better than God. To the corruptible, I saw that I should seek you there, and learn from there the origin of evil, that is, where the corruption comes from, by which your substance cannot be profaned. For corruption is truly in no way contaminates our God. By no will, by no necessity, by no unforeseen chance, because he's God. And what he wills is good. And he himself is that good. But to be corrupted is not good, nor are you compelled to do anything against your will, since your will is not greater than your power. But it would be greater if you yourself were greater than yourself. For the will and power of God is God himself. And what can be unforeseen by you, who knows all things? Nor is there any sort of nature that you do not know. And why should we give any more reasons why that substance which is God cannot be corruptible? Since if it were so, it could not be God. So we're looking at definition of God is being incorruptible, unchangeable, and unhurtable, unable to be injured. And God has the will and the power to remain that way. Otherwise, if God was changeable, we could change him. He could change himself into a better God. Or we could imagine him to be a better God. And we can't, because that's then no longer the definition of God. So we'll stop there for today, for you to meditate upon evil. We know that it is our free will that brings about evil. And we know that God is not a human, has not a human form, but is spiritual. And we'll be discussing these ideas more with Augustine the next time we meet. God bless you.